thought it would be fun to wrap that series up today in sort of a special way, just as a way to get a lot of times where we'll open God's Word together and we'll talk later. We hear that it was the testimonies and the real life stories of people that really helped connect. And so we wanted to, sort of open ourselves up to you. We've got some very imperfect marriages represented on the stage today, and but they're marriages that have been around for a while. They're marriages that are better today than they were when they started. And so I want to make some introductions. Huge privilege to do life with these people. This is Joel and Kelsey Gropp. If you don't know Joel and Kelsey, this is Justin Courtney Live. So we also, friends of yours, also kind of represent the pastorate here on this campus. And we're actually have kind of been at it for about the same amount of time. Courtney and I crossed 16 years last fall, and Joel and Kelsey are in their 16th year right now. And actually, the age spread is about the same, about 4 years distance, and between the married couples here. I'm 45, Joel's 38, and so for us, it's like it kind of gives you an idea of how things progress as the seasons go by. So our goal today was just to be able to speak God's word to you in the sense that we spent a lot of time with God's word, and we want you to see how it's playing out in imperfect relationships. So welcome these guys to the stage, and we'll get busy here. Very, very. Why don't you gather around the table just a little bit, Joel, here, and our first question really is for something that we stopped doing a long time ago. In a sense, which was looking for a mate. We haven't stopped dating, per se. Question for everybody, if someone was to approach you, say, think back to your dating days, what's one bit of advice that you could give somebody who's looking ahead to marriage? Maybe 30 years from now, maybe hopefully 2 years from now. Somebody's looking ahead to marriage. What kind of advice would you give them? And anybody can start this one off.
Yeah, I'll start that one. So the first thing that came to my mind when I read the question was, ask all the questions. I think what we don't want to happen is to kind of be in la-la land in a dating relationship and then get to marriage and have all these surprises, right? So I would say just don't be afraid to ask as many questions. And it doesn't have to be on the first date or the second date, but just as the relationship
Make it the first date.
Progresses.
Steak and Shake is open 24 hours. Just ask all the questions right away.
I don't think that with relationships probably not going to last very long. But just any question. I think especially if you do end up getting married, there should be no question that's off limits in marriage. And so if you think that the relationship is going in that direction, ask, what's your view on money? How many partners have you had? Tell me your history as a kid. Just all the things you can think of. There should be nothing off limits. And if there are things off limits, or questions that maybe someone's not willing to answer, then I would say that's probably a red flag. But yeah, you don't want to have surprises. Yeah,
that's good. And I think mine probably goes hand in hand with that, and it almost maybe sounds anti, and it's not. But if I were to give one bit, it would be put off the serious stuff as long as possible. And I think that there's ways to overlap. In other words, I think as you have a friendship, you kind of get into those deeper areas, and you get to know the person that way. But as Courtney's saying, get to know them better than just on the surface. But I feel like I've seen a lot of relationships tank too early or move too quickly because getting serious about somebody is so much fun. And that's what causes us to kind of race ahead. We can get too serious physically. We can get too serious emotionally. I think there's even a way to get too serious spiritually. Each of us should be really serious about our faith and pursuing Christ, but letting somebody into that sacred space, that should take time. Otherwise, all of these ways are ways to attach to somebody way more than we should too soon. And then it's really hard to have good perspective if it's time to break up, because everything is so linked, and we're sharing phone plans already, and there's all this attachment, and it's really hard to be clear-headed and level-headed if to judge, is this a relationship that we're going to choose to make go the distance. So that would be my line.
Joel, come back. I won't say anything too scary, I promise. He got scared for a second.
He's like, I cannot answer this
see
one,
mine.
you guys. What would you say, Joel? How would you, one bit of advice?
Yeah, I had a paper bag back there. No, kidding. I would say, so the phrase that I thought of when thinking about this question was date in community. And that basically means don't isolate yourself from your friends, from community, from church, from your surroundings. You probably have friends. I had friends growing up that when they started to date, we never saw them again. And then they broke up, and then they turned around, and all their friends are like, oh, well, we just figured we weren't friends anymore, or there wasn't a community. So I would say date in community. Do not isolate yourself.
Yeah, some good assurance to that.
Yeah, that's good. When Joel and I were dating, Joel lived with 3 other guys, and it definitely helped us when we were in moments we shouldn't have been in. And then all of a sudden this guy walked in, you're like, oh, yes. But mine is actually, it's a little bit maybe intense sounding, but at least have one good argument before you get married. I mentor a lot of chicks, and when they say, oh, we never argue, we have all the same ideas and opinions, I'm like, no, you don't. Who is lying? Who is lying? And oftentimes it's the girl trying to just like give into what the guy wants because they want them to love them. But I found this great quote by Dr. Caroline Leaf. It said, if you're worried a relationship can be ruined by an honest and thoughtful conversation about feelings and needs, then it doesn't have stability anyways and not worthy of your energy. I know Joel and I early on had a couple big ones, and it was good for us. The first one was when I made him spinach lasagna, and he took one bite, and this is the face he made. And it was like, of course, I burst into tears and ran away, and he had to come calm me down. So
I thought it was a TV dinner. I didn't know she made it.
he thought it was microwaved. And I'd spent 2 hours making this thing. But anyways, have one good argument, because then you can see each other's hearts, you know how to negotiate, how to communicate your concerns and your desires. It's so important.
That's good. That's good. Let's talk about boundaries. As you're getting to know somebody, as you're dating, what are some good, healthy, I guess, emotional boundaries, spiritual, physical boundaries that we can put on a dating relationship to make sure that we've given it a good run and that we know what we can know? Courtney, why don't you take that one?
Sure, yeah. I think a lot of times, and even outside of relationships, but we can sort of set ourselves up to fail. When we first started dating, we were in our mid to late 20s. I had my own apartment. He had his own house. And so you just have a lot of freedom to, do whatever you want, hang out whenever you want.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we put ourselves in a position where we were just setting ourselves up to fail. Physically, just being together alone in times of the day where we shouldn't have been, crossing, physical boundaries that we knew we didn't want to cross. And so I think I remember us having a lot of conversations about the boundary that we're setting for ourselves is that we're just not going to be alone in each other's houses at night, because nobody has that much self-control. It's like if you struggle with Oreos and you
right.
keep bringing Oreos into your house, you're just setting yourself up to fail because you know that that's your weakness. So knowing what your
miss
weaknesses
Oreos.
are. What?
I said I miss Oreos.
We
Also,
do like Oreos.
and if you're following Jesus and you're struggling in a dating relationship to stay pure physically, just know that something is very right about that. If you're not physically attracted to that person, that should be a red flag. So it's not that it's a bad thing, it's that it's a good thing, that it's ahead of its time. And we had to acknowledge that was one more indication that things were moving in the right track. But we also got to move. We got to do this according, God's way.
You want to honor God, and so you have to just give yourself some rules and boundaries. And I think too, also inviting people into that. I remember we had, at least 1 or 2 people who knew us well enough that we allowed them to say, hey, how are you guys doing physically? How's that going? Are you proud of how you're handling that? And to have people you trust enough that can, like you always say, mind your business, I think can be really helpful too.
Find someone to
you
mind
know
your
that someone's going to
business,
ask
yeah.
you, then you're going to probably be more careful, yeah.
That's right. And believe it or not, you can get attached too early, emotionally and spiritually as well. So those are all boundaries worth setting, because otherwise you can destroy the relationship. We've all we've watched the movies and we've known people and we've known ourselves. You kind of wonder what could have been. And without the right boundaries, the bad gets out, the good gets in, and you never really know what can happen, from there. And so boundaries on all those different levels is worth having. I would say working backwards from the thing that God teaches us in the Bible, the thing that we want to enjoy, work backwards from that, and you'll know what boundaries you need in order to protect that as it grows. Here's another question. Kelsey, why don't you start us off with this one? Fights, because we want to hear about what you guys fight about. I was going to ask you guys, how long did you date? Do you remember how long you dated? We were met to married in about 16 months, I think.
Yeah, ours is not a prescriptive plan. I
Our-
was 30, he was 35.
It
but how long did you date?
Not the age,
Yeah.
the amount of dating.
No, I'm saying that because we were older, so we knew a little
It was,
better.
Oh,
it
got
was 9 months, I think.
Got it. You were yeah, got it. So we have two examples
That is
of
not because I was pregnant.
kind of a
People-
faster track.
Yeah, it was about 9 months. Yeah, so it was fast track because we were older and kind of had some grown-up decisions to make about life and moving and stuff. So.
Yeah, no, I think the longer you track with Jesus and the more you stay focused, right person stands out, right? Anyway, but you said this earlier, Kelsey, that if you haven't had a good argument, you really don't know how the other person is going to behave in a moment when you don't agree. And the fairy tales are not telling us this part. You're going to disagree about lots and lots of things. So it's not about if you ever disagree, it's about how you fight, not just what you might fight about. So the question is, for the Grops, what have been some things that have really caused an impasse or a rift? Stuff that you've been through and you've worked out, stuff that you're still in the middle of. Can you give us an example of what you guys tend to disagree about and how far down the road you are from figuring that out? It's probably not perfect, I would imagine, like us.
How much time do we have? No. Yeah, I would say for us, really, it's I think for us, we're both firstborns, so we're stubborn. So when we got married,
Speak for yourself.
when we first got married, we knew right away there were certain things, certain topics that we were going to have to be careful. Finances, of course,
Some money.
and big decisions, like things like that, really came to the surface early on. And I think for us, it was understanding, okay, there's going to be a challenge each time these big things come up. But I think that the amazing thing, so for our story, we were both working full-time, had regular jobs when we first got married, and then we decided to go into ministry, felt like God was really calling us and pulling us to that, so we quit our jobs, took the, whatever it was, 70% pay cut to be in ministry, and instantly our finances were an issue. So it was like within the first year of our marriage, we set ourselves in this position of either God is going to do a miraculous thing with us early on, or we're going to kill each other. because I mean, that's the
We
one.
really did love each other, I promise.
But I say that because, finances are always a hot topic for most relationships. And so for us to quit our jobs and take a huge pay cut, it was like
And we had a baby.
we were almost daring God to say, here's an impossible situation. Can you show us that you can help this work? And he did. And so I think early on that was a huge test for us because we didn't know, how we were going to pay certain bills or how we were going to get through certain financial things. And he provided every step of the way. And so I think for us, it was a taste and see that God actually is good. And if you put yourself out there and trust him, and it's one thing to say we trust God. It's another thing to say, well, I'm in this circumstance that if he doesn't come through, it's not going to work. And so I think for us, that was a big foundational piece for us to put our trust in him really early on, knowing that if he doesn't do a miracle, it's going to be really tough.
Kelsey, comment on the process of going from 90% disagreed to where you guys are today, like what it takes.
Yeah, so a big part of me was choosing to let Joel lead our finances. And that wasn't easy as a 30-year-old who had complete control of her finances. And I felt like it was pretty smart and wise. and was maybe more organized in budget and stuff, but we also found out that it stressed me out way more than him early on. And if we were going to take this step of faith financially, I also had to take the step of faith to trust that my husband could be the leader in that way in our home. And that meant that we didn't have to carry that same amount of tension that we would have had we both been trying to grapple for the leadership in that. And it doesn't mean that I don't get to vocalize my opinion. But it also does mean more and more, like I don't even know sometimes some of the bills that are being paid because I've had to take my hands off of that so that Joel feels like I respect him in that area. And like he said, and I've seen him, one reason I could trust him, I've seen him trust the Lord. He will tithe even when we don't seem like we have the money, and then the Lord provides after that. Like he's taking these steps that I can respect, that I know I can follow his lead in that. And I think finances or whatever it is, the biggest thing when I was thinking through this is arguments get ugly when we go in wanting to prove the other person's wrong. And in so many areas that we have differing opinions on, and that's what I'm going to say, differing opinions, different perspectives, part of what we've brought in from our childhood, part of just who we are, you have to view the other person as, you have a different opinion than I do. That doesn't mean that you're wrong necessarily. And so it's when we start to view the other person as the enemy and as wrong or right or as wanting to win a war, that's when it gets super ugly really fast. And so I think when you go into arguments, no, you have a different way of looking at things. How can we come to that middle ground that is truth, right? And they can both agree on.
Do you want to admit that we fight about things?
Well, I think as we've processed these questions, I think we realize that we probably don't argue enough. I think because...
I think she's saying two things. One, I think that it's okay to know that you don't have to have a home full of constant arguing and tension. We're going to see things differently, but that doesn't always have to result. Our kids have never, I don't think, ever heard us shout at each other, have never heard us lose it with each other or anything like that. It's not because we're great. It's just the perspective of, okay, well, there's a time and a place, and we'll figure this out. And there's hope in that situation, rather than just, put the gloves on. But yeah, I would agree. If we erred to one side, our history has been not arguing enough. Like, maybe stuffing it too quickly for you. For me, it's like I don't want to be the big guy who shouts, so I don't want to hurt her. And you can't always end with things being unsaid. That's not going to make a great marriage. So I think we've had to figure that out. But we definitely have disagreed about a lot of things. So.
Yeah. I think one thing I wanted to add though is I think early on when we did have fights, we were just telling Joel and Kelsey, I was having this memory of one of the very first fights I feel like we had before kids. We were probably like married a year. I had not figured out myself enough in my own kind of communication style, processing style. I'm very much like an internal processor, very like thinker more than a feeler. And he's obviously the opposite of that. External, he needs to communicate, process everything out loud in the moment. And I need time to maybe a few hours, maybe a day to think about it, figure out in my head, because if I try to process in the moment, I'm going to get flustered, I'm going to get mad, I'm going to say things that I'm going to regret later. And there was a fight, I don't remember what we were even arguing about, but there was a fight early on where I was trying to meet him, I was trying to communicate like him in the moment. And I just remember, and I'm not a screamer, I'm not a yeller.
I don't remember this moment.
But I just have this very vivid memory of me just getting so angry and just screaming at him, I never win! I just felt like he always won the arguments, and I could never win anything. And it was so frustrating. But as our marriage grew and as I learned more about myself, now it's like, okay, I hear you. I can listen, and then I need time, and he knows, okay, I need some space now. We can come back to this, and I have to be respectful enough to not make him wait 4 or 5 days, because he's ready to talk about it. But it's just a mutual understanding now. So I think a lot of times you don't understand how you argue and how you process personally, and that can really be a roadblock of respecting the other person's how they process and how they hear and how they. communicate. Yeah.
Yeah, you believe it or not, you want the differences of opinion. What was the line that you heard recently Julie Richard said? Or
Yeah, it
something
came
like
out of the
that?
Gottman Institute, if anybody's heard of that, but there's a statistic that said 69% of all marriage arguments always will go unresolved. Like, you're just going to disagree about 69% of things, and you're not going to find resolvement to those things, and that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, that there's a difference. There's a difference between God making you one, but still having given you two brains in the marriage. And you want to preserve that because more thoughts, more perspective make you wiser as a household. That doesn't always have to instantly translate to gloves on, we're going to go at it. And something I really appreciate that Courtney said is that knowing the other person, you can get those ideas on the table smarter by giving each other space, by speaking each other's language, by not actually preying on those vulnerabilities, but actually just figuring out best time, best place, let's put a plan together. So we're working on that. Let's move on to another question. How do you prioritize your relationship with God and each other while navigating all the other things that vie for your attention? Joel, I want to hear from you on this one. Courtney, I want to hear from you on this one.
Yeah, I would say, even going back to our example with Kelsey and I and finances and taking a pay cut and making our situation difficult because we had to fully trust in God to supply for us, I would say foundational things for any relationship should be God, spouse, children, family, friends, coworkers, that kind of order. And so for us, any situation or disagreement or crisis that we come into, those foundational orders, that piece doesn't change. And I think it's obviously easier said than done, but I think for us, navigating through life with kids and ministry and work and all of these elements that can, kind of be like waves, ebb and flow with good times, bad times, hard times, that foundational structure has to stay in place. So God always has to stay at the top. And it can't ever be, well, once I get this figured out, once we straighten this out, once we're okay here, then we'll go back to him. And that's when we have found, when we've done that, where the issues start to come. And so when he's not at his rightful place at the very top of our list, I think that's when we have found that we have gotten in trouble. And that's not to say that it's not difficult. It's just to say that no matter what the situation is, he has to be first.
Courtney, how would you do that? We have a lot of families and a lot of couples who are new. It's almost like there's a shifting of foundation of their lives, the relationship with God, relationship with each other. What are some things you can do to make sure that those things are protected in the busyness of work, kids and life, and kids and pandemics and kids,
Yeah, I think it helps to just know what season you're in. I think a lot of times we find something that works, and so we do that thing in a certain season, and then the season changes, and we're still trying to do that same thing, even though the season has changed. And I know, obviously, as a mom and when you have littles at home, it's really hard to find those pockets of time to get into God's Word or just have some space to be quiet, or find date nights, things like that. So I think knowing your season, we've personally just shifted into a season where this is the first year that all of our kids are in school all day. And that's a really big change. It gives me a lot of margin. It gives us time if we want to take a lunch date or do something during the day. We just have a lot more space to do that. But the last 13 years, we haven't had that space.
Yeah, that was impossible.
So I think just knowing what can work for me right now. Like in the mornings, I have a little chunk of time between 6:45 and 7:15 where that's kind of my morning time where I can sit on the couch. Cooper goes to school, but I have about 30 minutes before I need to get the other kids up, and so that's my pocket of time to read.
And if I'm home at that time and I see that, I don't sit next to her on the couch because that's sacred, and what I can do is protect that for her.
Yeah.
It's hard for her.
Yeah.
I'm a way earlier riser, so I can create those moments a little more easily than she can. So kind of
Yeah.
recognizing how
Yeah,
to
but
help.
just not looking at what other people are doing, but just what can work for me in this season? How can I find those little pockets of time to connect with your spouse or your kids or with God?
Yeah, a word I keep hearing from both of you guys is intentionality, knowing that season and just being very precise about if it's going to be God first and my spouse second, then how are we nourishing that? How are we protecting that? So,
Well, and I think to your point, Justin, I think as a spouse, you need to protect the other person's spiritual journey when they are making advances. Joel, being a worship pastor here on Sunday morning, he gets up super early. So Saturday nights, as a family, we have protected that space for him. He goes to bed early. He's doing some devotional time. And the kids and I just leave him alone because we're protecting the fact that he wants to prepare his heart for Sunday morning. And so if you see your spouse doing that, don't try to intrude on it. Don't try to make it about an us moment necessarily. Like, protect that they are trying to press into their relationship with Jesus.
I thought you said that's when the F1 races were on Saturday
Yes.
nights. Is that no? Never mind. I must have misunderstood. Did you? Real quick, because kids are such a big piece of that. Kids can hijack all of the attention and all of the schedule. Did you? How many kids, Joel, did you think you guys were going to have did you have a plan? Did you have an idea in your head? Did you have a number?
I always thought 2.
You always thought 2, Kelsey? Did you have a number in your
I
head?
thought 3, 2 bio, and 1 adopted.
We
and then
both
that
come
changed.
from a long line of 2s, so I just
Oh,
assumed.
so that's.
And then we had 2, and we're like, let's stop there.
How many did you?
I think 3 or 4 was what I
You
what
3 or
I
4?
was
I
hoping for.
remember you
yeah.
saying like 2 or 3, and
Okay.
so when we got into 4, I felt like I was treading on thin ice because I was like 6 sounds good, so it's not.
But you came from a big family.
I
So
came
our
from a big family, so
expectations-
maybe that's what it is. Is that when you got a picture for that? But
Easy peasy.
Yeah.
6 kids.
more kids, we got to figure out what's causing it. So, how about this question? How do you communicate what you need from your spouse or what you need from each other in a marriage? I think we talked a little bit about what it means to stuff it. And we stuff it because we don't have the guts to bring it up. We stuff it because we don't have the words. We get too emotional. How do you find your way through that and get to a place where there's actual open communication in a marriage? What would you say, Kels?
Yeah, so I have seen, I don't know, a current cultural trend. I am seeing it as a trend, but it's in the church too, where women are taking on...
And Kelsey, can I ask, are you more of a stuffer or a blurter? Or is that even a fair...
Blurter.
You're more of a blurter, okay. And you're a little bit more of a
Blurter.
stuffer, so there it is.
Joel, I need your help.
It's good to hear the perspective,
Yeah.
so okay, go ahead.
But I think there's like an independence movement to a fault, where it's like the women, because we can, we're taking on everything, right? And so what happens in a marriage if we try to wear all the hats, it's kind of what I was communicating about finances. I could do our finances, I could pay our bills, I could take out the garbage, like I could do all of the things, but in a marriage, the healthiest marriage is when you're forming a partnership together. And so you do kind of have to find what roles each person is going to take on. And so I think as when our tendency too much has been we take on all the roles, then we get super exhausted, then we start blaming the husband for not doing anything, and meanwhile the husband's going, but you didn't ask me to do anything, and they're feeling like they don't have a role to play. And so I think there has become an imbalance in some of our homes that way. But so here's what I would say for women. I think we need to ask for help. And I think we need to try to be more dependent on our spouses to form that partnership and not just go to our corners and be like, I'm going to be strong and do it all myself. But I think husbands, you need to notice more. Because some of us are tired of asking for the same stuff over and over. And if you ask for help in certain ways over and over and you don't get a response, what we're going to do is we're just going to buckle down and do it ourselves. And then we're going to start to distance ourselves from asking for help more. So men, as much as you can notice or respond to an ask, that's going to be huge. Again, we're forming a partnership together. It's not about 2 lives, it's about 1 life and how you can make 2 people become 1 life.
Yeah, you got any thoughts on that? This has not been easy for us all the time. Nope, see, there it is. There's your communication.
I have a process
that question.
See, I haven't processed the question,
I didn't
so
process the
I got
question.
nothing.
Yeah, no, I think that what stands out to me is if there's one thing that you'll never stop working on in your marriage, it's communication, because seasons change what you need to say or hear from each other. And, just because you're good speakers and because you have good ideas, it almost says nothing to your ability to actually hear what the person is saying, to be able to volunteer the right question at the right time. So, so that's key. What about this? What's one thing, I guess this will be our last question. What's one thing that you would say to someone who's trying to save a struggling marriage? Maybe a marriage that the longer it's gone on, maybe the more dead it is starting to feel. That's common. Maybe a marriage that is in the midst of a trial that was just completely unforeseen. Like, this is one of those questions they never thought to ask. What are you going to do if? What are we going to do if? And so invariably, the marriage itself feels like it's hanging by a thread. If you could give one line of hope, what would you say?
I think I would just say hold on, and I think I would say pray that God would sort of turn your hearts to each other. I think there's, so many seasons, and marriage ebbs and flows so much, where you really like each other, and then some days or seasons you're like, I don't even know if I like this person anymore, and it just ebbs and flows so much. And I think when we get into those downward parts, it can feel really hopeless. It can feel really frustrating. And I think knowing in your mind, okay, this is going to change. The winds are going to shift again. I'm just going to hold on. I'm going to keep praying that God will turn my heart to that person, or that, their heart will be turned towards me. I think, just not giving up hope and just holding on that it's going to shift again. The seasons go like this. And so if you're in a down one right now, just know that eventually, if we're not talking about abuse and addiction and stuff like that, there are other things that make it way more complicated. But if it's just you've drifted apart, you've been in this for a really long time, and it feels like you've sort of just, you don't know who the person is anymore. I think the winds can shift, and just to be patient for that.
I would add to that. I think too, with any relationship, there's a sacrifice that has to be made by you, the individual. You're trying to have a relationship, and especially a marriage, with your spouse, and there are things that you have to let go of in yourself. And I think, and you guys know too, when you have kids, you just can't be selfish anymore. Marriage takes one chunk out of your selfishness. Having kids takes another giant chunk out of that, and it's constantly this idea that I have to let go of some of the things that I think, I want to fight for or push for. And so I would add to what Courtney said too. Yeah, it's just there's a point of asking God, can you help us? Can you align our hearts? And I would also say as well, like Courtney said, like there are situations in marriages where we know that's beyond, where there's abuse involved, where there's, just where the other person has no longer committed to that promise, to that covenant, and they have broken that. And so we're not talking about, those are special situations that we know God has extended grace for those that need to get out of those relationships. But for those relationships where it's a mutual thing and you're just not seeing eye to eye, I personally believe that it's possible. And Kelsey and I have had people pray over us, couples pray over our marriage. And it's been so beneficial to us because there were things that we did not see eye to eye on. And over time, we could see God slowly shifting that as we were letting go of kind of the selfishness that we have, and he was aligning our hearts. So that would be one thing, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Add something?
Yeah, I think kind of briefly adding on to that, like 3 years ago, Joel and I don't know if he would see it as one of the hardest seasons in our marriage, but that's how sometimes you feel it differently, but I would have seen it as one of the hardest marriage seasons we were in because of deception that was happening around us and what people were doing to us. And so it does take a toll on your marriage. And I went to my mom, honestly, for a lot of counsel. And in those moments, kind of like what Courtney was talking about, what Joel was talking about, when you don't feel like doing something toward your spouse that is loving, my mom would say, if you don't feel like touching him, too bad. Just start rubbing his back. Like, you can do actions that actually help align your heart. And one of the actions that I did, and this is kind of the point I wanted to land on, is I started gratitude journals. And I was upset a lot. I felt distance from Joel's heart. I even felt distance from our own kids sometimes, from myself. And a gratitude journal brought me back to what is actually truth in this situation. There is always good in someone. And there's a reno show I watch, and it's Why the Heck Did I Buy This House? And people always buy a house loving something about it, but as you're in it for 10, 15 years, like a marriage, you start to see the things that are dripping and the things that are annoying you. And you have to be brought, like in the show, they bring them
We're
back.
not talking about Joel right now.
He's dripping. But you have to be brought back to why you originally fell in love with the person,
Right.
because there are always good things about that person. So we have to choose to focus on these 5 good things as opposed to these 2 negative things that might really be glaring at the time. So go back to gratitude and like finding those things again. Ask Jesus, like Joel said, ask Jesus to remind you of what's good about that person.
Yeah, it's really good. And Joel said something that we want to do as we kind of wrap our worship up today is I'm going to pray, and our worship is complete for the morning for many of us, and kids have had an amazing time downstairs in Heritage Kids once again, and we know that there's a Sunday to get to, but it's been our habit over the last few months now. We've really enjoyed preserving the room to be a place of worship, even if you just stay in your own chair and listen to the music and complete what you're journaling or what you're thinking about, and just speaking to the Lord. It's just staying in his presence and making this just a house of prayer. So we're going to do that in a few moments. In fact, I'm going to excuse you guys from and give you guys a chance to pray with some people. Can we thank these guys for coming up, being vulnerable, and sharing some stories? As we have concluded our services with prayer partners, we're going to have some prayer partners around the room. And Joe and Kelsey will be here to pray. Courtney and Justin can pray with you. There's a definite humanity and an imperfection to the marriages that we have. And it's not about picking a person who will never do you wrong, who will never surprise you. It's the same thing for those of us who are single. It's about faith. And it's the journey of following Jesus and the journey of Satan being at war with God's kids, that there will always be a new season to come that will position you to go, I don't know how we're going to make it through this one. And it looks like this is a place where maybe we have to call it. And Joel spoke to that. Not every relationship makes the turn, and sometimes there's some wisdom to that. But on the whole, majority of relationships, we just know that we get into places that we just don't know how we're going to be able to make it around this thing. And that is a great time. It's a great time to depend on the grace of God to carry us through another part of our life that we just can't do our own carrying, right? And so that's something that all of our faith, every one of us, our faith needs to be equipped with hope and just continuing to bet on the grace of God, willingness to let other people in, and just believe that Jesus has a way when we don't have a way. So I want to pray now for all of us, and I want us to pray together. Lord, I just want to say thank you for such open, honest, relational conversations throughout this month. And I thank you for every person that's here in your family as we seek to have relationships and lead them in a way that honor you. God, even now, I pray that your Holy Spirit would be speaking to each individual person as we're trusting you. We're opening our hands to the relationships you've given us. We're offering them to you, and we're asking you, how would you lead this relationship? What do you want to see more out of me when it comes to blessing other people, when it comes to being attached to other people? God, we have put the burden on having our needs met on you. We have put the great burden of having purpose in life and an identity worth speaking of. We have put that on you, Lord Jesus. And we pray you'd show us how not to put that on other people, but instead position us to be people who give grace and mercy. Make us free to forgive. Help us to be the people who it is a blessing to go through life with. Because your Holy Spirit just has this way of, as you said in John 7, that everlasting life just seems to bubble out of your people. God, we want to lift up to you relationships that we're confused about. Relationships that feel like they're dead on the inside. And we just want to say, we don't know what's going to happen next, but we know that if anybody can resurrect something that was dead and make it alive, it's you, Jesus. We bless your name for it. We want to trust you more. Not just receive your guidance, but actually see you put your hands on something that we broke and bring healing. So I ask for that in your name. Father, make us a church that is faithful to pray for each other. A church of people who are minding each other's business. And nobody is going through the hard times of life alone. Because this is why you have your people. This is why you sent your Spirit. We love you for that.